right, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive into something pretty interesting.
Okay.
You know how sometimes you see politicians get away with saying things that are,
Yeah.
let's just say, a little too creative with the truth?
hmm
We're going to try to understand why that actually works on some voters.
Yeah, it's a really interesting paradox.
Right,
You'd think honesty would be like the most important thing for voters.
right.
But turns out it's not so straightforward.
Exactly. And to unpack this, we have a great piece from Mother Jones
Okay.
called Trump and His Voters. They like the lying.
Interesting.
What really blew my mind was this 2018 study
hmm
that found that some voters actually find politicians more authentic when they lie.
I mean, it does sound crazy at first.
Yeah.
But think about it. We've all seen those movies where the rebellious hero breaks all the rules
Right.
and somehow ends up winning.
Yeah.
Sometimes that logic kind of bleeds into how people view politicians.
So you're saying there's a bit of like a rebel factor at play here.
Absolutely, yeah. This study really dives into it.
Okay.
The authentic appeal of the lying demagogue.
Hmm.
What they found was that when voters feel like the whole system is rigged against them,
Right.
the researchers called it a crisis of legitimacy.
I see.
They're more likely to embrace a leader who's willing to lie.
Interesting.
It's almost like the lie itself becomes a symbol of their rejection of the establishment.
And the Mother Jones article really drives that point home with the example of Trump and his supporters, right?
Exactly. The article argues that for some of his supporters, the truth of his statements is almost beside the point.
Hmm.
What matters is that he's saying what they feel, even if it's not factually accurate.
Right.
It's like he's voicing their frustrations and anxieties,
Okay.
whether or not those frustrations are based on facts or just feelings.
It reminds me of that part of the article where they list some of Trump's more outlandish claims, like the one about immigrants eating people's pets. I mean,
Wow.
where did these ideas even come from?
Well, remember what I said about that crisis of legitimacy?
Yeah.
When people feel like the traditional sources of authority,
Okay.
the media, experts, government institutions have failed them, they become much more susceptible to these kinds of outlandish claims.
Interesting.
It's almost like they're so disillusioned that they're willing to believe anything that confirms their pre-existing worldview,
Right.
even if it defies logic.
So it's not just about the lie itself.
Right.
It's about what that act of lying represents to these voters.
Yeah.
It's a way of sticking it to the establishment, even if it means embracing falsehoods.
Exactly. And that's what makes this phenomenon so concerning.
Right.
Because if we start normalizing political lies as just part of the game,
Right.
it could have some pretty dangerous consequences for our democracy.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect segue into our next segment where we'll explore those potential consequences in more detail.
Sounds good. It's almost like that old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. When trust in institutions is low, sometimes it's less about believing the message
Yeah.
and more about aligning with someone who's seen as fighting against a common enemy.
So in a way, a politician's willingness to lie can actually be seen as a sign of strength
Yeah,
in the eyes of some voters.
that's what the research suggests, yeah.
Huh.
And the Mother Jones article goes even further,
Oh.
pointing out that this isn't just a Trump phenomenon. It's a global trend.
Wait, so this isn't just an American thing.
No.
Are you telling me there are other politicians around the world
Oh, yeah.
who are using this same playbook?
Absolutely. Think back to the rise of populist leaders
Okay.
in Europe and South America.
Right.
Many of them campaigned on this whole platform of rejecting political correctness and elite opinions, often resorting to blatant lies and distortions to appeal to voters who felt ignored by the establishment.
So it's like these voters are so disillusioned with the status quo
Yeah.
that they're willing to accept almost any alternative, even one that involves bending the truth.
That's a key insight here, and what's really concerning
Yeah.
is that this dynamic can create a vicious cycle.
Okay.
The more people feel disenfranchised,
Right.
the more they're drawn to these kinds of leaders. And the more these leaders lie and erode trust,
Yeah.
the more disenfranchised people become.
Right.
It's a recipe for instability and democratic backsliding.
Wow. That's a pretty sobering thought. It really makes you wonder, where do we go from here?
Yeah.
If this trend continues,
Right.
what happens to our ability to have like rational, fact-based political discussions?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
The author of the Mother Jones piece seems to be sounding the alarm,
Okay.
urging us to wake up to this dangerous trend before it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the key takeaways from all of this is we need to become more discerning consumers of information.
You mean like fact-checking what we read and hear before we share it?
Exactly. It's so easy to get swept up in the emotional appeal of a powerful message.
Right.
But it's crucial to take a step back and ask yourself, what's the source of this information?
Okay.
Does it align with what I know to be true from other reputable sources?
Yeah.
What biases might be at play here?
So basically, we need to become more critical thinkers.
Yes, and that also means being open to hearing different perspectives.
Right.
We may not always agree with them.
Yeah.
But understanding where someone is coming from, even if we find their views like frustrating or even reprehensible, can help us have more productive conversations and maybe even start to bridge some of these divides.
I love that it's not about silencing opposing views. It's about engaging with them in a way that's both critical and compassionate.
Precisely. And that can be tough, especially in today's highly polarized political climate.
Yeah.
But if we want to break out of this cycle of distrust and division, we need to find ways to reconnect with each other and rediscover our shared humanity.
It sounds like you're saying that we need to look beyond the lies and try to understand the deeper anxieties and frustrations that are driving people to embrace these kinds of leaders.
I think that's a crucial first step because ultimately we're all in this together.
Yeah.
Whether we like it or not, we're all sharing this planet and we have to find a way to coexist peacefully and productively.
That's a powerful message. So to bring it back to this specific deep dive,
Okay.
what are some actionable takeaways our listeners can use to navigate this tricky landscape where truth seems increasingly subjective?
I think the first step is recognizing that we're all susceptible to manipulation.
Okay.
None of us are immune to the emotional appeal of a well-crafted lie,
Right.
especially when it confirms our pre-existing beliefs. So being aware of our own biases is key.
So a healthy dose of self-awareness can go a long way.
Absolutely. And beyond that, I think it's important to cultivate a healthy skepticism
Okay.
towards information, particularly in the online world where misinformation spreads like wildfire.
So fact check, double check, and maybe even triple check before you hit that share button.
Exactly. And finally, remember that building a healthier political discourse requires more than just calling out lies. It's about engaging in respectful dialogue with those who hold different viewpoints, even when it's difficult.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, finding common ground and building bridges is the only way we're going to move forward as a society.
Beautifully said. I think you've given our listeners a lot to think about today now to wrap up this deep dive. So let's take a minute and recap what we've learned today.
Okay.
We started off wanting to understand why some voters seem so drawn to politicians who, well, play fast and loose with the truth.
Right.
We uncovered some pretty fascinating insights from both the Mother Jones article and that 2018 academic study.
Absolutely.
I think it boils down to this.
Huh?
For certain voters, a politician's lies can actually make them seem more authentic,
Right.
more in tune with the struggles of everyday people.
Yeah.
And that has a lot to do with how widespread distrust in the establishment has become.
Exactly. It's almost like that old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend,
Right.
but taken to a whole new level.
Yeah.
If traditional authority figures are seen as the enemy,
Right.
then someone who rebels against them, even through lies, can be seen as a hero.
Exactly. And this isn't limited to just one politician or even one country. We're seeing this trend pop up all over the globe,
Yeah.
which suggests that it speaks to some really deep societal anxieties.
Right.
So knowing all of this, what can we do about it?
Well,
It can feel kind of overwhelming to think about how to counter this trend.
the first step is awareness.
Okay.
By understanding the psychology behind why this happens, we can start to recognize it when we see it. That makes us less susceptible to falling for these tactics ourselves.
Right.
But it also helps us understand where people who do support these leaders are coming from, even if we disagree with them.
So it's about empathy as much as it is about critical thinking.
Absolutely. And, on the critical thinking side,
Right.
remember to be skeptical of everything you see and hear, especially online.
Yeah.
Always consider the source, look for evidence, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
This deep dive has definitely given me, and hopefully you too, a lot to think about.
Yeah.
But here's a final thought to leave you with.
Okay.
We focused on how lies can erode trust in institutions. But what about the flip side?
Right.
What if we focused on rebuilding that trust?
Yeah.
from the ground up?
Interesting.
How can we as individuals contribute to a more honest and transparent political system?
Yeah.
That's something I'd love for all of you to ponder as you navigate the world of information out there.
Yeah, that's an important question, and it's one that deserves our attention.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, the health of our democracy depends on it.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.